Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. Today we are continuing on with Punk's Not Dead by Runic, and today we are doing chapter 2. Kirishima Bakugou, really?
Yeah, really, we've been over this 5 fucking times.
But I like Kirishima, Uraraka whined, flopping back onto her bed with what Katsuki felt was an unnecessary level of drama.
How the fuck is that relevant?
Katsuki demanded, leaving his uncomfortable sprawl on the carpet in favor of sitting up so he could glare at her better.
I needed someone to do it. He said yes. Fucking simple.
Uraraka continued to pout at him. He's the only member of the boys' team that's willing to spar with me.
And he'll still have a death wish when I'm done with him,
Katsuki replied, rolling his eyes. Katsuki had been on the receiving end of Uraraka's jujitsu prowess exactly once, when they'd met back in kindergarten. To his 5-year-old self, it was what made her worth being friends with. Looking back on it, he kind of understood where the guys' team was coming from, even if they were being little bitches about it. That's not the point. When you guys break up, there are politics involved, and I'm going to have to pick a side. Katsuki sighed loudly. This, right here, was why he didn't talk to anyone at school.
I could literally not give less of a shit which side you choose. We barely talk at school anyway.
Uraraka seemed ready to complain some more, so Katsuki continued before she could.
We're meeting up later this week to talk out details. I'll make sure you get his ass-kicking rights, okay?
Okay. Seemingly mollified now that she knew she wasn't going to lose her sparring partner. Katsuki went back to lying on the floor, and he heard the bed springs creak as Uraraka did the same on her bed. They stayed like that, sharing the space in companionable silence until Uraraka abruptly sat up and leaned over the side of the bed, hovering over Katsuki's face. "Have you texted him back yet?" she asked, a weird lilt to her tone that Katsuki wasn't at all a fan of. Katsuki shoved her face away with a snarl, which, because it was Uraraka, and she was fucking annoying like that, had no effect. She just laughed and rolled off her bed, joining him on the floor. "Seriously, have you?" Katsuki shook his head, and Uraraka gave him an affronted look. "It's been over an hour!"
Fucking so?
You have your read receipts on. That's rude, especially since he's doing you a favor.
Are you forgetting the part where he nearly hit me with a car?
Uraraka made a dismissive hand motion, then jabbed her finger accusingly at Katsuki's chest. "Text him."
No,
Katsuki said, purely out of spite. He probably should text Kirishima, if only to get all of this shit over with as soon as humanly possible. "Do it, or I will," Uraraka threatened. Uraraka was not, from an outsider's perspective, scary. She had a chronic baby face, weighed 110 pounds soaking wet, and was usually smiling. Katsuki had known Uraraka since elementary school and was therefore not an outsider. He took out his phone. The message app was still open on Kirishima's text. "Shitty hair, 1658. Looking forward to working with you. Shitty hair, 1658. 2 emoticons, high-fiving." "Shitty hair?" Uraraka asked in what was approaching her maybe stop being an asshole voice.
No, you don't get to fight me on this. It's terrible fucking hair.
Uraraka let it go, but continued to hover over Katsuki's shoulder while he typed out his reply. "Me, 1815. When are you free?" He shut off his phone and turned to look at Uraraka.
"Happy?"
She shrugged. "You would have had to do it eventually. Are you staying for dinner?"
"Fuck no,"
Katsuki said, standing and stretching. He may not have liked eating with his family, but at least they didn't try to fucking chat with him. "Keep me updated," Uraraka called after him as he climbed out of her window.
"Only if you don't force me to come over every time I try,"
Katsuki snapped back. He glanced up at the window. and right on cue, Uraraka flipped him off. Katsuki returned the favor, turned on his heel, and headed home. Time passes. By the time Katsuki had navigated dinner, the inevitable stream of questions about where the fuck he'd been, and finished his homework, he was more than ready to just be done with the day. Unfortunately, when he turned on his phone to check the time, he had 4 messages from Kirishima, and putting those off until morning was inviting a very real possibility of Kirishima pulling some dramatic stunt at school the next day, or dropping out of the plan altogether. So Katsuki resigned himself to his fate and opened the messages. Shitty hair, 1846. Oh, thank fuck. Shitty hair, 1846. I thought I messed up your number and sent that to some random person. Shitty hair, 1846. Anyway, shitty hair, 1847. I know you aren't free tomorrow, but I can do the same time pretty much any day. Katsuki honestly couldn't remember the last time he'd seen anyone use that many exclamation marks. He was tired just looking at them. Me, 2013, Wednesday, same time, same place. Shitty hair, 2013, ominous. Me, 2014, shut the fuck up, can't you make it or not? Shitty hair, 2014, I can make it. Shitty hair, 2014, see you then. Katsuki didn't bother replying. They had a plan. Kirishima and his exclamation marks could wait until Wednesday. Time passes. Tuesday and Wednesday passed the same way they always did. School was school, whether it was the most prestigious high school in the country or not. Wednesday afternoon found Katsuki at the same table as last time, with the same waitress glaring daggers at him. Kirishima, fortunately for him, wasn't late this time, although his hair was wet and he was out of breath.
We could have just met up later,
Katsuki said as Kirishima dropped into the seat across from him. Nah, dude, I have the same break as Monday. If we started later, we'd have less time. Katsuki was going to point out that maybe Kirishima should have fucking mentioned that and suggested a different day to meet. But Kirishima seemed to understand how to work under a time limit, if nothing else, and they got right to business. So, did you have specific points you wanted to go over, or...
Logistics were your fucking idea, shark face,
Katsuki snapped. Oh, PDA, I guess? What are you cool with? Katsuki shrugged.
Don't know. Whatever the norm is.
Are you sure about that? Kirishima asked, raising his eyebrows skeptically. Because if the norm is what my locker neighbor and his girlfriend have going on, it's making out on my locker at 7 a.m.
I don't do shit halfway,
Katsuki said firmly. But he didn't particularly want to make out with Kirishima, but he'd never really wanted to make out with anyone, and if it was needed to keep up the ruse, then so be it. Wow, okay, Kirishima said, looking vaguely unsettled. Though whether it was because of Katsuki's words or his attitude, that was unclear. Let's try that again. No offense intended, but I don't want to make out with you. So how about I give you stuff I'm cool with and you let me know if there's a problem? Katsuki highly doubted there would be, but he gestured for Kirishima to go on anyway. Arm around your shoulders?
Fine.
Hugs?
Fine.
Kiss on the cheek?
Fine.
Holding hands?
No,
Katsuki said, surprising both himself and Kirishima. Really? You'll make out with me, but that's where you draw the line? Kirishima asked, a teasing lilt creeping into his voice.
My hands get sweaty, asshole. This is for your sake,
Katsuki snarled. It was half true. Katsuki's hands did tend to sweat a lot, but if Katsuki didn't hate the feeling of his own sweaty palms more than literally anything else, he definitely would have inflicted them on Kirishima. Okay, linking pinkies then? Katsuki thought about it for a second before settling on.
Fine.
Cool. I think I had one more. Kirishima trailed off, staring into the middle distance as if trying to summon something from his memories. Finally, he jolted a bit and slammed his hands down on the table, having apparently successfully remembered what it was. Right, pet names.
You can try, but I'm not fucking responding to any of them,
Katsuki said, making Kirishima laugh. That's good, though. You're pretending to be you, Kirishima pointed out.
Yeah, fine, whatever. Anything else?
Kirishima shook his head. Nope, that's all I got.
What else did we need to go over?
Katsuki asked, checking the time on his phone. They were making good time. Kirishima still had 45 minutes left of his break. How did we meet? Fake meet, I guess.
Keep it the same,
Katsuki said.
It's easier to back it up if it starts out true.
Kirishima hummed approvingly, but started to frown after considering it for a bit longer. Okay, how the fuck did I convince you to go out with me after nearly giving you a spinal? Katsuki mulled it over for a second until he'd come up with a semi-reasonable answer.
People saw when you ambushed me at my locker, right? We can just say that we ended up spending time together, and for my favor, I got you to pay for drinks. We got along, so we agreed to do it again, and then we started dating.
Clean, simple, and fucking efficient. Kirishima seemed to agree, if his absent nodding was any indication. I like it. Who asked who out?
I asked you, obviously.
Katsuki scoffed. Kirishima made an offended sputtering noise. What do you mean, obviously? Katsuki rolled his eyes.
You tracked me down at school so you could apologize to me when you could have gotten away with it and no consequences if you hadn't bothered. Your noble ass wouldn't ask someone who you thought you'd wronged out.
Kirishima stared at him for a few seconds, dumbstruck. He snapped out of it fairly quickly with a shake of his head and a laugh. You're pretty perceptive, huh, Bakugou?
Don't act so fucking shocked, shitty hair. I'm good at everything.
Of course, Kirishima said, though he sounded much more sarcastic than Katsuki considered reasonable.
Fuck off. Have you got anything else, or can I go home?
Figuring out when we break up, I guess. This Katsuki had been prepared for. Or rather, this entire scenario had gift-wrapped the answer and handed it to him.
My family,
Katsuki said.
They were absolute shit to you, and you didn't want to deal with it again.
Kirishima frowned. I wouldn't break up with you because of that. Katsuki snorted.
I think you're severely underestimating how shitty they are. We can throw in some other stuff when we get there, but they're definitely enough to drive you away.
Kirishima finally nodded, though he still didn't look convinced. All right.
That's it?
Katsuki asked. That's it, Kirishima replied.
I'll meet you at the main door on Monday,
Katsuki said, standing from his chair and getting ready to leave. Kirishima laughed. Are we doing some grand entrance as a couple? Katsuki leveled Kirishima with his most fearsome grin.
I don't do shit halfway.
Time passes. The rest of the week went by somehow both more slowly and more quickly than usual, but Monday arrived eventually. Katsuki got to school 20 minutes earlier than usual so he could meet up with Kirishima. He thought that he'd be waiting on Kirishima since that seemed to be their usual dynamic, but to his surprise, when he arrived at the main door, Kirishima was already there, sitting on the highest step. He looked surprisingly nervous, swinging his feet and chewing on his lower lip.
You're going to bite a hole through it if you keep that up,
Katsuki said by way of greeting, making Kirishima jump. Ah, hey, Bakugou, he said, scrambling to his feet and grinning. He still looked nervous.
Why are you so fucking jumpy this morning?
Katsuki demanded. Kirishima hadn't looked worried while Katsuki was actively threatening to kick his ass, so this was, in Katsuki's opinion, ridiculous. Kirishima didn't immediately deny it, which was the reaction Katsuki had expected. Instead, he said, Are you sure about this? Katsuki stared at him for a second, trying to figure out if it was some weird joke that he didn't understand, but Kirishima looked completely serious.
Yeah, I don't know if you've somehow forgotten, but this was my fucking idea.
I know, but this isn't something you can come back from, Bakugou. I know your goal was to piss people off, but dating... Kirishima paused for a second to gesture at himself. Me isn't something people forget.
You think I give a shit what these extras think of me? I'm top of the fucking school. I can associate with whoever the fuck I want.
People are going to be weird about it, Kirishima insisted. Katsuki sighed.
Are you having second thoughts, shitty hair?
No! Kirishima exclaimed, sounding almost offended. Just wanted to make sure that you were aware.
Well, you've done that, and I don't give a damn. Shall we?
Katsuki motioned grandly at the doors, and when Kirishima didn't make any move toward them, he grabbed him by the wrist and pulled him along. Kirishima caught on to what was happening after that, and followed along until they were right at the doors, where he pulled up short and nearly sent Katsuki crashing face first into the doors. Katsuki was no longer surprised that this asshole was willing to fight Uraraka, since he was apparently made out of fucking solid rock. Fuck, he'd forgotten to tell Kirishima about Uraraka. Whatever, she could wait for now.
What the fuck is your damage?
Katsuki demanded, whirling around to glare at Kirishima. Sorry, I wanted to do this before we went in, Kirishima said, removing his wrist from Katsuki's grasp and shifting their positions so only their pinkies were linked. Once he was done, he smiled sheepishly at Katsuki, squared his shoulders, and said, Okay, all good, let's go. Katsuki realized as the doors swung open that he was now officially saddled with this moron for the next month. He was sure he'd made worse decisions at some point in his life, but he was having some trouble remembering them at the moment. Things started out fine. Katsuki made a beeline for his locker, towing Kirishima behind him, and started the process of getting his bag into his locker and his books out. Kirishima made his life slightly easier by serving as a glorified bookcase while Katsuki shoved his backpack into his slightly overstuffed locker. You know, Kirishima said casually, I thought you'd be neater than this.
Fuck off,
Katsuki replied, jamming his shoulder into his locker so it would fucking close.
Books take up room.
Kirishima handed Katsuki his books and linked their pinkies again, all in one move. Motherfucker could be so smooth when he wanted to be, apparently. Now, call me crazy, but I keep my books in my desk and use my locker for, the things my locker is supposed to be used for.
These aren't school assigned,
Katsuki grumbled. Kirishima looked at the books Katsuki was carrying, one of which was a thick calculus workbook. Nerd. Katsuki kicked him in the shin, hard, which only made Kirishima laugh, much to Katsuki's annoyance. By the time they'd arrived at Katsuki's classroom, Kirishima had stopped laughing. Katsuki appreciated that because it meant he didn't have to kill him and find someone else to fake date.
Okay, this is me,
Katsuki said, stopping in front of the Class 3A door.
Fuck off.
Wait, can I go inside? Kirishima asked excitedly.
What? No, you have class, moron.
Kirishima rolled his eyes. Yeah, in like 10 minutes. Come on. I've always wanted to see what the smart kid class looks like.
The classrooms are standardized, dumbass. It's literally exactly the same as yours.
Please. Kirishima whined, pulling a ridiculous pout that made Katsuki want to kick him again.
Ugh, fucking fine.
Katsuki relented, after only a few more seconds.
Come on.
He pushed open the door and dragged Kirishima in behind him, pointedly ignoring the victorious yes. Deku was in his usual corner, talking quietly with Four Eyes, Half and Half, and Frog. And Ponytail was at her desk revising something. Other than that, the room was empty. All five of them looked up at Katsuki and Kirishima's somewhat boisterous energy. But Katsuki leveled them with his best don't fuck with me glare, and they quickly went back to their business. Aw, it is the same. Kirishima had the nerve to actually sound disappointed.
I fucking told you it would be,
Katsuki said, sitting down at his desk and taking out whatever he needed for his first class so he could fit his extra books inside. I know, but I thought you might be lying, sworn to secrecy by admins so that we lesser beings wouldn't know what the class was like for the elite. Katsuki closed his desk and gave Kirishima a good long look.
You're really fucking weird, you know that?
Kirishima grinned at him and hopped up onto Katsuki's desk. I try.
Cute,
Katsuki said sarcastically.
Don't you have your own class to get to?
Dunno, Kirishima said, scanning the classroom with deliberate slowness as he tried, and failed, to pretend he wasn't smiling. The whole exact copy of my old classroom is starting to grow on me. I might stay. The warning bell went off, and Katsuki shoved Kirishima off his desk.
Class, asshole, go.
He snapped, trying to inject as much venom as possible into his voice. Kirishima being this ridiculous made it difficult to summon his usual early morning crankiness. Yeah, all right, Kirishima said dismissively before leaning in and planting a light kiss on Katsuki's cheek. Katsuki had agreed to this, of course, but it still made him tense up in surprise for a second before the part of him that knew this was a necessary evil came online and made him relax his shoulders.
Go,
Katsuki said firmly, pushing Kirishima away from him and towards the door. Kirishima finally went, but not before stopping at the threshold to blow an exaggerated kiss at Katsuki. Katsuki flipped him off, and Kirishima vanished into the hallway, laughing. From the far corner of the classroom, Katsuki heard the sound of several heavy books falling to the ground. He turned his head towards the sound and found Deku gaping at him like a dead fish with his books scattered around his feet. The others were also staring at him, though they at least had the decency to be less obnoxious about it.
Fucking what?
He barked, jolting all of them out of their collective daze. All of his semi-normal classmates went back to what they were doing, but Deku just started muttering to himself while Half and Half picked up his books. Katsuki resolved to ignore it and tried reading while the rest of his class trickled in. The muttering was, unfortunately, really fucking annoying, so he only made it through half a paragraph before he turned around, slammed his hands on the desk behind him, and snapped,
If you have a fucking question, just fucking ask it.
Oh! Deku jumped, nearly surprised he was being directly addressed. You and Kirishima!
Yes, he's my fucking boyfriend now. Will you shut up?
Deku's eyes widened, and he looked like he was preparing to ask a follow-up question, which Katsuki was not in the mood for, but he was saved by Professor Yagi walking in and calling the class to order. Class was the same as usual, though Katsuki found himself a lot more aware of breaks than he normally was, because even though he acted exactly the same as he usually did, i.e., stayed at his desk and ignored everyone, the rest of the class seemed to have taken it upon themselves to whisper and stare at him with the least amount of subtlety possible. It was fucking excruciating. The worst part, in his opinion, was the fact that Kirishima had been fucking right about this. People were being weird. But Katsuki was grateful for small mercies, like the fact that everyone knew better than to try and actually talk to him. Finally, after a few cycles of nonsense, lunch rolled around, and Katsuki was, for the first time since he arrived at school, alone. Most classes had at least a few people stay behind and eat lunch in the classroom, but 3A had learned by week 2 that the classroom was Katsuki's domain, and they were not fucking welcome there during lunch hour because Katsuki ate lunch alone. As far as he was concerned, this was just a fact of the universe, like gravity or the day-night cycle. Uraraka was his friend, but at school she hung out with Deku and his merry band of nerds. And since Katsuki had exactly zero interest in trying to talk to anyone else, he ate at his desk in silence, then got a head start on his homework while he waited for break to be over. Which was why, when Kirishima appeared unannounced in the 3A classroom, all red hair and shark-toothed smiles, Katsuki's instinctive reaction was to throw his bento at his head. Hard. Kirishima managed to dodge it, but only barely. "Dude!" he said, watching the remains of Katsuki's lunch slide down the wall to the floor. "You nearly hit me!"
Guess I need to improve my aim,
Katsuki growled. Not only did he have to deal with Kirishima interrupting his peace and quiet, now he didn't have any fucking food. Kirishima pouted at him. "I didn't mean to startle you. I came to see if you wanted to eat lunch in the caf with me."
Why the fuck would I want to do that?
Well, it's going to be a lot easier to convince people that we're dating if, we're seen together in public.
People saw us this morning.
Kirishima raised his eyebrows. And is your plan to let them see us together once and hope they take us at our word beyond that? Katsuki glared at the rice grains stuck to the wall behind Kirishima's head. Fucker had a point, even if Katsuki didn't want to admit it.
Fine,
he said, pushing back his chair and getting to his feet.
But you're helping me clean that up, and buying me lunch.
Okay, I'll concede to buying you lunch, because I kinda doubt you brought money if you had a lunch with you, but deciding to go all guerrilla warfare on me was your choice, dude.
I was provoked.
Katsuki grumbled, kneeling down and collecting his container from the floor. God, the tiny grains of rice were going to be a fucking nightmare. I understand that you count other people existing near you as provocation, but I don't, Kirishima said, crouching down beside Katsuki and taking the container from him. So I'll wait with you, but I'm not helping. Katsuki bitched about Kirishima being useless while he cleaned, but he didn't force Kirishima to help. Mostly because the nagging Uraraka voice in the back of his head said that Kirishima was doing him a pretty huge favor already.
Let's go,
he said when he'd finished throwing away the last of his rice. All right, Kirishima said, sliding off the desk he'd been sitting on while he waited. Katsuki was beginning to sense a theme with Kirishima and desks. I hope you don't mind, I sit with some people during lunch. Katsuki already didn't like where this was going. I promise, they're really nice. And you'll only have to meet 3 new people. I mean, you've technically met Denki before, but not for very long and not under the best circumstances.
Your getaway driver,
Katsuki interrupted dryly. Kirishima laughed nervously. Yeah. Katsuki let the silence between them linger just long enough for it to be uncomfortable, then said,
I've changed my mind. He's paying for my lunch.
Kirishima's answering laugh was loud enough to startle a girl passing them on the other side of the hallway. Oh man, he's not going to be happy about that.
Yeah, well, I wasn't fucking happy about being bowled over by you 2 idiots, but we all have to suffer in life.
Kirishima suddenly caught Katsuki by the elbow, preventing him from continuing forward. In here, dude, he said, nodding towards a set of double doors while an amused smile pulled at the corners of his mouth. Did you seriously forget where the cafeteria was?
No,
Katsuki retorted reflexively. He had, but like fuck he was going to admit that. He pushed past Kirishima and through the doors, a decision he regretted almost instantly. The cafeteria was loud and crowded, and all the things Katsuki usually went out of his way to avoid. We're in that corner, Kirishima said, appearing at Katsuki's side and pointing at an isolated table to the far left of the room. There was only one person at the table, a girl with curly bubblegum pink hair and even more piercings than Kirishima, who spotted them almost instantly and waved them over. You should have told us you were bringing him, eh? We would have organized a proper greeting, she said once they'd arrived at the table. And that's exactly why I didn't tell you, Kirishima responded, dropping into the seat across from her. Katsuki, who had reluctantly taken the seat beside Kirishima, was still trying to decide whether he should go back to his classroom and accept that he wasn't going to get to eat, decided that some recon was in order.
Who are you?
He asked the girl, who he'd dubbed Pinky for the time being. Pinky turned to Katsuki with a wide, overly friendly grin and stuck her hand out toward him in what was clearly an invitation for a handshake. Ashido Mina, dancer, gossip, and best friend of Kirishima Eijirou, she said, deftly turning her extended hand into a peace sign when she realized Katsuki wasn't going to take it. How fucking dare you? Came an offended gasp from behind them, and Katsuki glanced over his shoulder to find 2 guys, both holding cafeteria trays and coming their way. One of them, the one with bright fucking yellow hair, slammed his tray down next to Kirishima and pointed an accusing finger at Ashido. You do not get to claim best friend rights. Ashido stuck her tongue out at him It had a bright purple ball piercing through it. I've known him the longest, Denki. I have dibs. You can't call dibs on a person. The other new arrival, this one with black hair and suspiciously few piercings, given what the rest of the group looked like, argued. I love you all equally, Kirishima said in a tone of someone who had this argument many times and was starting to get tired of it. Now stop being weird before my boyfriend realizes I've tricked him into lowering his standards for me. Katsuki snorted derisively at the obvious ploy, but no one else at the table seemed to find it amiss. Holy shit, Yellow Hair said, eyes widening like he hadn't even noticed Katsuki was there. Nice to meet you, dude. I'm Kaminari. Sorry about the whole nearly killing you thing.
He's the one that owes me lunch?
He asked Kirishima, ignoring the offended squawk from Kaminari. Yep, Kirishima replied. He shrugged apologetically at Kaminari. Sorry, Denki. It was his condition for coming. It hasn't even been a full day and I'm already being replaced by your boyfriend. Kaminari sighed dramatically. He stood up and headed back to the lunch line. Does he have any grievances with me I should know about? Suspiciously few piercings asked, taking a bite out of a large dill pickle. It was the only thing on his tray, aside from 7 different individual Jell-O cups and a packet of soy sauce.
Which one are you?
Katsuki asked. Sero Hanta, he replied, pouring some soy sauce onto the pickle before taking another bite.
I didn't, but now I definitely do.
Katsuki said, watching with morbid fascination as Sero set aside the now half-eaten pickle and started on one of the Jell-O cups. Sero shrugged, seemingly unconcerned. Yeah, that's normal. He continued eating.
Are they always like this?
Katsuki asked Kirishima. He shook his head. They're usually worse.
Fantastic.
Kirishima got out his own blessedly normal lunch and started eating, pausing occasionally to talk to Ashido, Sero, and once he returned with Katsuki's lunch, Kaminari. The food was way better than Katsuki had expected, and listening to the morons talk wasn't terrible, all things considered. They were even occasionally funny. Finally, when everyone had finished actually eating and the table had dissolved into exclusively talking, Ashido got everyone's attention by slamming her hands down on it and standing up. I nearly forgot! We're doing an official welcome for Bakugou on Friday at my dad's restaurant. Kirishima and Katsuki exchanged a glance, and both started to protest, but Ashido cut them off with a wave of her hand. Shh! This is non-negotiable. You never know what someone's really like until you get to see them outside of school. Be there or face my wrath. She was still smiling, but there was steel in her gaze. Katsuki was being tested, and if he failed, their entire scheme failed with him.
Fine,
he bit out, earning cheers from the 3 stooges and a concerned glance from Kirishima. They could figure out what they were going to do about Friday later. For now, the warning bell had just gone, and Katsuki had class to get to. All right, friends, thank you so much for joining me for Chapter 2 of Punk's Not Dead by wrunic. I hope that you enjoyed this chapter, and I hope that you'll come back and join me for the next one. See you next time.